What would you do if your boss told you, "You're no good here" one day, only to come begging for your help the next? I'm Sarah Mitchell from Chicago, and 3 months ago, my world turned upside down when those 5 words changed everything. But what happened next? That's a story about resilience, ambition, and the sweet taste of proving someone completely wrong. You won't believe how this ends. The fluorescent lights of DataCore Solutions' downtown Chicago office buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting their cold glare across rows of identical cubicles. Sarah Mitchell sat hunched over her computer screen, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the practiced rhythm of someone who had spent countless nights perfecting reports that others would take credit for. At 28, she had been with the company for 4 years, watching promotion after promotion slip through her fingers like sand. The autumn wind rattled the windows of the 32nd floor, and Sarah could see Lake Michigan stretching endlessly toward the horizon. She'd grown up in Lincoln Park, just a few miles from here, dreaming of making her mark in the corporate world. Her parents had immigrated from Ireland in the 70s, working double shifts to give her the education they never had. Every late night at the office was a tribute to their sacrifice. "Mitchell!" The sharp voice cut through the office ambient noise like a blade. Rebecca Harrison, regional sales director, stood at the entrance to Sarah's cubicle with her arms crossed. At 45, Rebecca embodied everything Sarah thought she wanted to become: confident, assertive, commanding respect from every corner of the office. Her perfectly styled blonde hair never moved, even during the most heated meetings, and her navy Armani suits were as sharp as her tongue. "Yes, Ms. Harrison?" Sarah swiveled in her chair, instinctively straightening her posture. After 4 years of working directly under Rebecca, she still felt that familiar knot in her stomach whenever her boss approached. "The quarterly projections you submitted yesterday, they're completely off." Rebecca dropped a stack of papers onto Sarah's desk with unnecessary force. "The client meeting is tomorrow, and this is what you give me. Numbers that don't add up. Analysis that's surface level at best. I need you to understand something, Mitchell." Rebecca leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You're no good here. You lack the strategic thinking necessary for this level of work. I've been patient, but patience has its limits. Maybe it's time you considered whether this industry is right for you." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she noticed several colleagues had stopped working to watch the interaction. Marcus from accounting was pretending to sort through files while clearly eavesdropping. Jennifer from HR was looking over with what appeared to be genuine concern. I can fix the projections," Sarah managed, her voice smaller than she intended. "If you could just show me what needs to be adjusted." "There's no time for hand-holding, Mitchell. I'll handle the client presentation myself." Again, Rebecca straightened up, her expression softening just enough to be more patronizing than angry. "Look, Sarah, you're a nice girl. You work hard, I'll give you that, but nice and hard-working aren't enough in this business. You need vision, leadership qualities, the ability to think 3 steps ahead of the competition. Some people have it, others don't. There's no shame in accepting your limitations." As Rebecca walked away, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor, Sarah felt something inside her crack. But it wasn't defeat. It was something else entirely. She looked at the projections on her desk, the ones Rebecca had dismissed so quickly, and realized something that made her pulse quicken. These numbers weren't wrong. They were innovative. Sarah had identified a market trend that traditional analysis would miss. She'd spent weeks researching consumer behavior patterns, cross-referencing data from multiple sources, creating projections that accounted for variables no one else was considering. Rebecca hadn't even bothered to look closely enough to understand the methodology. That night, Sarah stayed in the office until nearly midnight, not to fix her projections, but to triple-check them. She contacted industry sources, verified her research, and built additional models to support her conclusions. By the time she finally gathered her things to leave, she was more certain than ever. She wasn't just right about the projections. She was about to prove that being underestimated was her greatest advantage. Walking through the empty corridors toward the elevator, Sarah caught her reflection in the darkened window of a conference room. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who had sat frozen in humiliation 12 hours earlier. This woman had fire in her eyes and determination in the set of her shoulders. The elevator descended through the floors of the building, each one representing a level of corporate hierarchy she'd been told she'd never reach. But as the doors opened to the parking garage, Sarah Mitchell wasn't thinking about limitations anymore. She was thinking about possibilities, about proving wrong everyone who had ever made her feel small, and about the sweet satisfaction of success earned through grit rather than given through politics. The Chicago skyline glittered around her as she drove home through the late-night streets, each light representing someone else chasing their own version of the American dream. Sarah's dream was just beginning to take shape, and it looked nothing like the path others had tried to map out for her. 3 weeks had passed since Rebecca's devastating dismissal, and Sarah had transformed her approach to work completely. She arrived early, stayed late, and spent her weekends diving deeper into market research than anyone in the company had attempted before. The sting of humiliation had evolved into fuel for a fire that burned brighter each day. DataCore Solutions occupied 4 floors of the Merchandise Mart, that massive Art Deco building along the Chicago River. Sarah had always felt intimidated by its grandeur, but now she moved through its corridors with new purpose. She'd started networking within the company, building relationships beyond her immediate team, learning about projects and opportunities that Rebecca had never bothered to share with her. It was during one of these networking conversations that Sarah stumbled upon something that would change everything. She was having coffee with David Chen, a senior analyst from the West Coast division, when he mentioned a presentation he'd seen from Rebecca's last quarterly review. "Your boss really impressed the executives with those consumer behavior projections," David said, stirring his latte. "The way she identified that emerging market trend? Pure genius. I heard it might fast-track her promotion to vice president." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. "What projections are you talking about?" "The ones about the shift in digital purchasing patterns among millennials in secondary markets. Rebecca presented them at the executive retreat last month. She's been getting praise from all the way up to the C-suite." Sarah's blood ran cold. Those were her projections. The exact analysis Rebecca had dismissed as completely off and surface level. The work she'd been told proved she wasn't cut out for strategic thinking was now being celebrated as breakthrough insight that could earn Rebecca a VP position. "David," Sarah said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady, "do you remember any specific details from that presentation?" "Oh, absolutely." The way she broke down the data by geographic clusters was brilliant. "And that predictive model for Q4 purchasing behavior? I've never seen anything like it." She really went above and beyond the standard quarterly analysis. Every detail David described was directly from Sarah's research. The geographic clustering methodology she'd developed by studying census data and retail patterns. The predictive model she'd built by analyzing 2 years of purchasing trends. The Q4 projections that had kept her up nights, cross-referencing economic indicators with consumer confidence reports. Sarah excused herself from the conversation and walked to the nearest restroom, her hands shaking with rage and disbelief. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, seeing not just her own face, but the faces of every woman who had ever been diminished, dismissed, and stolen from by those in power. The next few days were a blur of careful investigation. Sarah began documenting everything. Timestamps on her original files, email drafts, research notes with dates. She reached out to her network of contacts within the industry, the same sources she'd used to verify her projections, and asked subtle questions about any conversations they might have had with Rebecca's team. What she discovered was even more extensive than she'd imagined. Rebecca hadn't just stolen one set of projections. She'd been systematically taking credit for Sarah's work for over a year. The innovative client retention strategy that had earned Rebecca recognition at the company retreat? Sarah's idea, proposed in a team meeting and later dismissed by Rebecca as too risky. The cost reduction analysis that had saved the company $2 million, based entirely on Sarah's research into vendor optimization. But Sarah's most important discovery came from an unexpected source. Jennifer from HR approached her one afternoon as she was leaving the office. "Sarah, can I talk to you privately?" Jennifer glanced around nervously. "I know this might be awkward, but I overheard part of your conversation with Rebecca a few weeks ago, and I wanted you to know that what she said wasn't okay." They walked to a quiet corner of the parking garage, Jennifer's usual professional demeanor replaced by something more personal and urgent. "I've been with this company for 8 years, Jennifer said. and I've watched Rebecca's career trajectory very closely. She's brilliant, don't get me wrong, but she's also strategic about taking credit for other people's work. You're not the first person she's treated this way. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a series of screenshots. I probably shouldn't be showing you this, but these are emails between Rebecca and senior management over the past year. Look at the timestamps compared to when projects were originally submitted. Sarah studied the emails, her heart pounding as she saw her own work described in detail, always attributed to Rebecca's leadership and innovative thinking. But more importantly, she saw something that made her pulse quicken with possibility. Jennifer, what's the timeline for the VP promotion decision? The announcement is scheduled for next month. But Sarah, Jennifer hesitated, then looked her directly in the eye. The senior management team will be looking for someone to fill Rebecca's current position if she gets promoted. They're going to want someone who understands her projects, someone who can hit the ground running. That night, Sarah sat in her Lincoln Park apartment, surrounded by printouts, files, and laptop screens. Her cat, Fitzgerald, wandered between the papers as she built what she privately called the case. Not just evidence of Rebecca's theft, but a comprehensive demonstration of her own capabilities, her strategic thinking, and her vision for the department's future. The city lights twinkled beyond her windows as Sarah worked through the night, fueled by determination and the growing realization that she wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. She was fighting for the promotion that should have been hers all along, armed with the truth and a newfound understanding of how corporate politics actually worked. By morning, Sarah Mitchell had transformed from victim to strategist, ready to play the game at a level Rebecca had never imagined she could reach. The Chicago winter had settled over the city with its usual fierce determination, coating the merchandise mart's windows with frost that transformed the morning sun into a kaleidoscope of light. Sarah arrived at the office early, as had become her habit. But today felt different. Today, she was ready to implement the plan she'd been crafting for the past month. The first part was already in motion. Through her networking efforts, Sarah had learned that Jonathan Walsh, the senior vice president, would be reviewing all departmental strategies as part of the VP promotion process. She'd also discovered that he had an open-door policy for employees with innovative ideas, something Rebecca had never bothered to mention to her team. Sarah had requested a meeting with Jonathan under the guise of presenting supplementary research that could support the company's Q1 strategy. She'd been careful not to mention Rebecca or make any accusations. Instead, she'd positioned herself as an ambitious employee, eager to contribute to the company's growth. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. On Wednesday morning, Sarah was putting the finishing touches on her presentation when her phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the caller ID. "Mitchell, I need you in my office immediately." Rebecca's voice carried an unusual note of urgency, even panic. Sarah found Rebecca pacing behind her desk, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Papers were scattered across her workspace, and her laptop displayed what appeared to be a half-finished presentation. "I need your help," Rebecca said without preamble. "The executive team has moved up the timeline for departmental reviews. I have to present our Q1 strategy tomorrow morning, and She paused, the word seeming to stick in her throat. "I'm having trouble pulling together some of the supporting data." Sarah blinked, hardly believing what she was hearing. The woman who had told her she was no good here was now asking for her help. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. "What kind of supporting data?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "The consumer behavior analysis, the market trend projections, the demographic breakdowns. You know, the kind of detailed research work you're good at." Rebecca's tone suggested she thought she was being generous with this compliment. Sarah nodded slowly, buying time while her mind raced. "When do you need it?" "Tonight. I know it's short notice, but this presentation is crucial for the department's future. I'll make sure you get recognition for your contribution this time." The promise rang hollow, especially considering the phrase "this time" inadvertently acknowledged what they both knew, that Sarah's contributions had gone unrecognized before. "I'll see what I can do," Sarah said, then added with calculated innocence, "What approach were you planning to take with the trend analysis?" Rebecca's eyes flickered with something that might have been panic. "I was thinking, well, what would you suggest?" It was confirmation of what Sarah had suspected. Rebecca didn't actually understand the analytical work she'd been taking credit for. She could present it brilliantly, but she couldn't create it. Sarah spent the rest of the day watching Rebecca become increasingly frantic. Phone calls to consultants who couldn't deliver on short notice. Attempts to pull data from previous presentations that didn't quite fit the new parameters. By 4 p.m., Rebecca was openly desperate. "Sarah, I really need that analysis," she said, approaching Sarah's cubicle with what she probably thought was a friendly smile. "I know I've been hard on you, but it's only because I see potential in you. This could be a great opportunity for both of us." Sarah looked up from her computer, where she had been putting the final touches on her own presentation for Jonathan Walsh. The presentation that would demonstrate exactly who had been generating the strategic insights Rebecca claimed as her own. "I understand you're under pressure," Sarah said carefully, "but I'm afraid I won't be able to help you tonight." Rebecca's facade cracked slightly. "What do you mean? This is part of your job responsibilities." "Actually, I checked the job description you had HR send me last year when I asked about advancement opportunities. Detailed market analysis for executive presentations isn't listed among my responsibilities." Sarah's tone remained professional, but she could see the impact of her words in Rebecca's expression. "Sarah, be reasonable. We're a team." "Are we?" Sarah asked, her voice still calm, but carrying an edge that Rebecca had never heard before. "Because 3 weeks ago, you told me I lacked the strategic thinking necessary for this level of work. You suggested I consider whether this industry was right for me. It would be strange for someone with those limitations to suddenly be capable of producing the analysis you need for such an important presentation." Rebecca's face went through several color changes. "Look, I may have been overly critical that day. I was under pressure myself. But this is important, Sarah. This presentation could affect both our futures." Sarah saved her work and began gathering her things. "You're absolutely right about it being important, which is why I'm sure you'll want to handle it personally, using your own strategic thinking and analytical capabilities." As Sarah walked toward the elevator, she could hear Rebecca making increasingly frantic phone calls. The desperation in her voice was audible even from across the office. Sarah felt a momentary twinge of sympathy, then remembered the humiliation she'd felt 3 weeks ago. The months of stolen credit, the systematic diminishment of her contributions. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, not working on Rebecca's analysis, but reviewing her own presentation for Jonathan Walsh. She'd structured it as a comprehensive strategic vision for the department, supported by 18 months of innovative research and analysis. Each slide was meticulously documented, with timestamps and source materials that would make the authorship undeniable. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and texts from Rebecca, growing increasingly desperate as the evening progressed. Sarah ignored them all, instead focusing on what tomorrow would bring. Not revenge exactly, but justice. Recognition for work that had always been hers, and an opportunity to prove that being underestimated had been Rebecca's greatest mistake. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond her windows as Sarah finally went to bed, more confident about her future than she'd felt in years. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its day. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a Chicago winter storm. Sarah walked into the Data Core Solutions building with steady steps, carrying herself with new confidence that several colleagues noticed. Her presentation was loaded on a flash drive in her jacket pocket, and her supporting documents were organized in a leather portfolio she'd bought specifically for this moment. Rebecca's presentation to the executive team was scheduled for 9 a.m. Sarah's meeting with Jonathan Walsh was at 2 p.m. The timing, she realized, was perfect. At 8:45 a.m., Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the executive conference room without being obvious about it. She watched Rebecca enter, her usual commanding presence noticeably shaken. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the tension in her shoulders, the slightly frantic way she was organizing her materials. The presentation lasted 37 minutes. Sarah knew because she'd been timing it, watching as executives filed out of the conference room with expressions that didn't suggest enthusiasm. Rebecca emerged last, her face pale, and her usual confidence completely absent. Marcus from accounting, who'd witnessed Sarah's humiliation 3 weeks earlier, approached her cubicle around 10:30 with barely concealed curiosity. "Did you hear about Rebecca's presentation?" he asked in a low voice. No. What happened? Complete disaster. Apparently, she couldn't answer basic questions about her own analysis. Jonathan Walsh asked her to explain the methodology behind the consumer behavior projections, and she just couldn't. It was like she didn't understand her own research. Sarah nodded sympathetically while internally celebrating. That's unfortunate. There's more. David Chen was in the meeting, from the West Coast Division, and he said some of the data contradicted things Rebecca had presented to them before. They're calling it inconsistent strategic vision and lack of depth in analytical understanding. And the morning progressed with a steady stream of office gossip about Rebecca's presentation failure. By lunch, it was clear that her VP promotion was no longer a certainty. By 1:30 p.m., Sarah had heard through Jennifer in HR that the executive team was reassessing their options. At exactly 2 p.m., Sarah knocked on Jonathan Walsh's door. At 52, he was the kind of executive who'd earned his position through a combination of sharp intellect and genuine leadership ability. His office overlooked the Chicago River, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the conference table where Sarah set up her presentation. "Thank you for making time to see me, Mr. Walsh," Sarah began. "I'd like to share some strategic insights that I believe could significantly impact our department's performance in the coming year." What followed was 45 minutes of the most confident presentation Sarah had ever given. She walked Jonathan through her analysis with the fluency that comes from complete understanding of the subject matter. Every question he asked, she answered with depth and precision. Every challenge he presented, she met with additional data that supported her conclusions. "This is impressive work, Sarah," Jonathan said when she finished. "The depth of research here, the innovative approach to market segmentation, it's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need more of in this company." "Thank you, sir. I'm passionate about this work, and I believe there's enormous potential for growth if we implement these strategies." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with newfound interest. "Can I ask you something? This analysis shares some similarities with work I've seen from your department before, but the quality and depth are significantly higher. Have you been developing this approach for long?" Sarah had prepared for this moment. "I've been refining this analytical methodology for about 18 months. I've documented the evolution of the approach, including timestamps and development stages, if you'd like to review the progression." "I would indeed." Jonathan's expression suggested he was connecting dots that painted an unflattering picture of Rebecca's leadership. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. We're currently evaluating the structure of our department leadership. How would you feel about taking on increased responsibilities?" Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I'd welcome the opportunity to contribute at a higher level. I believe I've demonstrated both the analytical capabilities and the strategic vision necessary for leadership." "You certainly have." Jonathan stood and walked to his window, looking out at the Chicago River. "I'll be honest, your timing is fortuitous. We've identified some inconsistencies in our current departmental leadership that need to be addressed." Over the next week, the corporate machinery moved with surprising speed. Rebecca was called into a series of meetings with HR and senior management. Sarah continued her normal work while fielding increasingly frequent conversations with executives who wanted to understand her background and capabilities. The official announcement came on a Friday afternoon. Rebecca Harrison would be transitioning to new opportunities outside the company. Sarah Mitchell would be promoted to Regional Sales Director, effective immediately, with a salary increase that doubled her previous compensation. Rebecca cleaned out her office that same day. As she packed her personal items into boxes, she approached Sarah's desk one final time. "I underestimated you," Rebecca said quietly. "I thought—" She paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I thought I could control your career trajectory. I was wrong." Sarah looked up from her computer, where she was reviewing strategic plans for her new role. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I didn't seek to damage your career. I simply wanted recognition for my own work." "I know." Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. "That somehow makes it worse." As Rebecca walked toward the elevator carrying her boxes, Sarah felt not triumph, but a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd proven that being told, "You're no good here," was wrong. But the cost had been someone else's career. That evening, Sarah stood in her new office, Rebecca's former office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The same lights that had once represented other people's dreams now illuminated her own realized ambitions. She thought about her immigrant parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her opportunities they'd never had. She thought about every woman who'd been told she wasn't good enough, smart enough, or strategic enough. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from colleagues, friends, and family. But the message that meant the most came from Jennifer in HR. You earned this through talent, integrity, and perseverance. That's the American dream working exactly as it should. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd been told she was no good here just 2 months earlier, was now responsible for a department of 35 people and a budget of $12 million. She'd proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. The city sparkled below her as she finally gathered her things to leave. No longer the same woman who'd sat frozen in humiliation in a cubicle. She was someone who'd learned that success wasn't about being given opportunities. It was about creating them, seizing them, and never letting anyone else define your worth. Walking to her car in the executive parking level, Sarah smiled at the perfect irony of it all. Rebecca had been right about one thing. This industry did require strategic thinking, vision, and the ability to think 3 steps ahead of the competition. She'd just been wrong about who possessed those qualities. If you enjoyed this story of perseverance and sweet justice, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas that prove sometimes the underdog doesn't just survive, they thrive. Hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept other people's limitations. Your support means everything to us, and we'll see you in the next story. Chapter 1. 4. Image prompts. 1 for each chapter. Chapter 1. Prompt. Professional woman in her late 20s sitting at office cubicle, fluorescent lighting, Chicago downtown office building view through windows, defeated expression, corporate environment, realistic photography style, modern office setting, business attire. Chapter 2. Prompt. Same woman looking determined while reviewing documents and computer screen, late-night office scene, papers scattered on desk, focused expression, transformation from defeat to determination, dim lighting, Chicago cityscape visible through window. Chapter 3. Prompt. Confident woman in business suit standing in corporate hallway, carrying portfolio, professional demeanor, other office workers in background, modern office building interior, natural lighting, empowered body language. Chapter 4. Prompt. Professional woman in executive office with Chicago River view, standing behind large desk, confident smile, business success atmosphere, corner office setting, golden hour lighting, achievement and triumph mood.